Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, Community Engagement Lead at Pathify. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a proud member of the Enrollify Podcast Network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow every day. Explore all of our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome back, everybody, to another wonderful episode of the Hired Geek Podcast. I am really excited for our conversation today with Raye, who I met at the Times Higher Education Digital Universities event a few months ago as the recording of this episode, where I was just kind of there, like fly on the wall, just kind of hearing a lot about what people are talking about in this sort of space that I love that Times Higher Ed has sort of created that is just focused on digital transformation, which we really kind of hone in a lot on this show. So I know kind of the unique aspect of what we'll talk about is a institution that is barely like a teenager in terms of like its longevity, and then just sort of Raye's kind of perspective with her position there. So I will let her introduce herself as we usually do. If you want to kind of just give a brief introduction, Raye, of yourself and your background, and then we'll talk more about Nightingale College and what it does and approach to supporting students.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I am Dr. Raye Mahlberg. I've been working in higher education for 24 years, worked in public institutions, private institutions, career colleges, kind of a big variety, mostly in student-facing roles, but I've been faculty as well, so inside and outside the classroom. Currently, I'm the Assistant Vice President for Learner Experience at Nightingale College. So that means I'm over all the things that are outside of the traditional academic setting that support learners throughout their program. Nursing school's super hard. And so we want to make sure that we're providing all the supports that they need to be able to successfully graduate and become great licensed nurses.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I think that you at least have the background or experience or sort of knowledge of what it's like to like be in and out of the classroom and can kind of, speak the language, I guess, of, the academic affairs, faculty, student affairs, all those kind of folks. But yeah, so if you want to, just for folks who may not be aware, because again, this is a very new institution, which is super awesome to be able to kind of explore the dynamics here for this episode. But if you can briefly explain the work that Nightingale does. And again, it was founded in 2010, just for folks to kind of have some context. But I know it does have, obviously, just a very firm focus on the disciplines that it is educating folks on and the modality and kind of way that it teaches. So if you want to kind of just briefly explain that, and then we'll kind of go from there for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, well, Nightingale College, it's 100% online nursing college with both pre-licensure and graduate nursing programs. We have everything from LPN or PN, depending on where you are in the country, PN to ASN, and our largest program is BSN. We also have graduate programs in nurse family practitioner, nursing education, and then this fall we're starting a mental health nurse practitioner program. So we focus on solving key issues in the nursing profession. We want to create diversity as called for by many of the professional organizations. We want to bring nursing education to underserved and underrepresented populations. And we're able to do that through this online program. We have simulations, we use augmented reality, virtual reality, as well as hands-on experience with patients. And so we're able to really access so many areas that we wouldn't be able to if we were based in one location. Rather than having learners come to us, we go to them. We go to rural communities all over the country to be able to really look at how we can get in there and solve the nursing shortage and change the face of nursing. People are more likely to access healthcare if they have people that they can identify with, that know their cultural background, that look like them, that have grown up in their communities. And so we want to bring that education to them where they might not have access to a nursing college, or they might not be able to get in because of waiting lists or other factors, maybe academic preparedness. And so we're providing a different level of support. We have about 5,600 learners across the country. And so we're really able to make a pretty big impact, but we're seeing growth every semester, which has been really, really exciting to be a part of. Just seeing how we can change what nursing looks like by providing it in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so great. I think just kind of really leaning into, I think it is one of those kind of thorny disciplines, I think, like nursing and all that, where like, you can, and a lot of programs have done this of like, trying to coordinate like local placement and all that. But I think it either like, they maybe try to keep it small or they've avoided it, or they certainly still have like a bias towards an on-ground program that's existed for a very long time. And they can, kind of just set it and forget it. They always get students because it has a good reputation. That's fine. But I think, really fully embracing digital education, it being fully online and you kind of growing up that way, as an institution, I think is just really refreshing and really just kind of fully embracing, like you said, just the need for qualified people all across this country versus it just being where there happens to be, a big institution that's doing it in person, or if you have to kind of disrupt your life or, do something that's, I don't know, like hybrid where you may still have to go to the institution. Is it really still, because I think that's what I'm starting to realize is that like institutions obviously have kind of an incentive or a motivation to be like, well, we want you to come here because we like invested all this money in these buildings and all that. And it's like, that's well and good for people that want that experience, but like they're like building online programs. And I guess I'll use like air quotes here, where it's like they're saying like, oh, look at us. Like we have online programs in any number of disciplines, but they're still like, well, we want you to like come here on campus and do like certain things. And it's like, yeah, I get it. Have those facilities, but I think just really fully embracing like, okay, wherever you are, and you may be like, I want to be a nurse, I want to do it where I am, where I've grown up in my community and all that. Because I think what you've seen and maybe you can kind of give some point of view on this, is that idea that like, okay, we'll train nurses here and we're just going to try to like spread them out, all across the country. And I think that maybe has worked okay, but it can just be where it's like, well, you still obviously like aren't going to force people to do that. There still has to be some choice of being like, well, actually, I like where I live. I don't want to have to move from where I am. Like, so I guess is that sort of part of it? Like, you are just really seeing that like people are responding to this and it's resonating with like, okay, yeah, I live in rural, Midwest state, whichever one. Like, I'm here. I want to like study online here and sort of put myself here to be able to be a nurse. Like, is that the dynamic that you're seeing with a lot of your students?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're still getting learners from urban areas, but I love to think of Oklahoma as an example. That's where I live, and we have a couple urban areas, but then much of the state is rural. And if you look at where our nursing schools are located, they're not really as accessible in those rural areas. So you could live way out in the panhandle of Oklahoma, and you would just have to travel to Oklahoma City once a semester to do your clinical experience for a few days. And then you're going back. You don't have to uproot your family. You don't have to move anywhere. You can still work full time. That flexibility is something that I know nursing programs can be really rigid, and you have to do these things at this certain time, and you have to, attend clinicals every day at this specific time. And so it really can be disruptive if you're trying to work full time or raise a family. And so I think putting a program online like this where you can have that flexibility. We do have some face-to-face experiences online where learners are live with their faculty and they're traveling to do their clinical experiences once a semester, and then their preceptorship, of course, at the end of the program. But for the most part, they can stay where they're at with very little travel. They can be flexible. They can do their work, when their kids are asleep or at school, and in between their work schedules. So it really provides a different type of nursing education just because it's so differently accessible. Also, when you look at what it takes to get into Nightingale College, we're not looking at all these points and things. We don't have these long waiting lists. We're having, over 1,000 learners start every semester, which is something that when you think of the traditional on-ground nursing school, that's not happening. They're much smaller classes. And so it's exciting to see how, wow, a couple years from now, we're going to have 1,000 nurses graduate from this cohort. And then 3 months later, it'll be another 1,000 nurses. And so it's really exciting to see how quickly we can change the nursing shortage if we're open to different ways that allow more access to the education instead of these very limited cohort sizes that are very limited to the labs on campus. I think also the other thing is incorporating the augmented reality and virtual reality into the program for simulations. really changes things exponentially. You can only fit so many people in a simulation lab, and simulation labs are really expensive. They're limited in what you can do, the amount of time you can be there in a nursing program that's on a campus. But when you're doing it we have Oculus goggles for our learners, and so 1,000 of them could be doing a simulation at the same time, and they're not necessarily all doing that concurrently, but there's so much more accessibility to allow more people by looking at things that are a little bit outside the box.
Yeah, and I think it's that opportunity that we have now is trying to figure out, certainly with certain course concepts and, everything, like what can be better served up, in like an augmented reality platform versus, trying to cram everybody into a room and you're trying to like peek over somebody's shoulder to like see, whatever. Or I guess that's just what I'm sort of imagining. But that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, though, is like that idea of, one, Nightingale is a very new institution. Two, it is a fully online and like you work remotely. I think they're based in like Utah and that sort of thing. So like just any anecdotes or perspectives on like, comparing the way that they operate with other institutions that you've worked at. Because I think it's one, there is kind of inertia of like decades or hundreds of years of like how they've done things. But there is still certainly, like you're kind of alluding to, is sort of certain core parts of like being a licensed nurse. You do have to like kind of, check off certain boxes and everything and, for like accreditation, whatever else. So you have to, honor that, but then try to take opportunities, I imagine, to leverage things like AR and all that. So I guess, just any other perspective, because even just like working there and working with your team and your colleague, like just any perspectives, whatever comes to mind, take it as you will, of just like what it's like to kind of work in that environment and doing what you're doing there.
Well, I think one of the things that makes Nightingale College unique is, you were talking about institution will have an online program, but they still want you to somehow interact with the brick and mortar. When I was getting my MBA online, I still had to go to my campus a couple hours away and take a test a couple times, which doesn't feel like what I signed up for. And so with Nightingale, we're 100% online. We don't even have a campus. And so we don't expect you to do these certain things in these certain places necessarily, aside from, of course, the clinical experiences have to be in an on-ground setting. And so you may have to travel for that. But other than those things, there's so much more flexibility. And I think it allows for a lot more innovation because we're looking at how can we bring that same type of experience to you in your home. So our learners get a kit where they're able to practice those skills and take videos of it, get feedback from their faculty so they know before they get to the clinical experience, okay, I understand how this skill works. I've tried it on this mannequin. Now I can take it and get signed off on my skill and then use those skills in the field and actually, work with patients. And doing things like that, we're able to give them those experiences. They still have some live experiences. So they do have interaction with their faculty. They get a lot of feedback. They do a lot of discussion with their fellow classmates and are able to still have that interaction. I have really noticed that there's still learners making great college friends. Like that's one of my favorite things to see on our Facebook pages is people posting pictures from their clinical experiences of the great friends that they're making, and they keep those people throughout. And so there's still that relationship stuff happening. We have optional webinars that learners attend. They meet other people, form study groups. So we're able to simulate those experiences that you would have in an on-ground environment in the online environment because that is our only option. And I think that really changes things when you don't have, okay, everybody come to the student union, we're going to do this celebration. How do we do that in an online environment? We have a walkathon for the learners where they get in teams and compete against each other and there's prizes and they get really competitive. And we have really high participation in it because they are excited to have those interactions and we're able to still simulate that in the online environment. I think also, just looking at how much we are trying to innovate and change things and constantly move forward and look at how increasing access to nursing education increases access to healthcare. And therefore, it makes us a healthier society. It makes us better as a whole. We're incorporating so many different technologies into the education. So not only are these learners able to learn in their own location not really at their own pace, because they still have to stay on track with how the courses go, but on their own time schedule. They're really technologically proficient by the time they graduate because they've used these technologies and the simulation programs for nursing students, but you can also use those for continuing education. You can, learn specialized skills. So there's things that they're learning that you're not going to learn in a traditional environment because they have to be so digital within the program.
Yeah, because I think that's a good acknowledgement is nowadays, I would assume it is far more likely that people are going to pursue their continuing education, kind of just lifelong learning journeys, like online. Like I think there's obviously there has been and always will be opportunities to go to like in-person workshops or different things. But yeah, like there's just so many opportunities for great learning to happen remotely and digitally. And I think, just being comfortable with that sort of learning environment and just having, I'm sure some of that is just like a good resource to go back to and things. And I think kind of to what you're saying is like, while you can't like, really disrupt the pace necessarily with some of the, the programs at your institution, like a lot of those digital tools do often really facilitate like, learning in the way that you would prefer. Like if you want to, go over it 50 times in a row because they're just sort of like, wait, hold on, let me see that again. Like, go for it. If you got the time, that's going to be helpful for you. Go for it. And other folks may just want to like, get it done, and it may not be like, well, I'm not like getting done, like completing the degree in a fraction of the time, but it's like, all right, well, this is pretty, this is coming pretty intuitively to me, so I can maybe kind of breeze through this and not have to like rewatch the video or go through the simulate, like do whatever, as many times as someone else might need to. But that just makes everything more accessible and allows more people to be more successful. So I think that is just a good, I guess, sort of like part of kind of the foundation of the experience that you're providing to folks. And to your other point, it's always just a pleasure to hear, I think, of just like the kind of reinforcing and affirming that notion of like, just because you're studying online doesn't mean that you want to just completely be isolated. And like, if we can just be the catalyst for these students to get together and form their study groups and go off and do whatever, it's like, I don't need to be like, big brother observing and, seeing all the interactions, because that's sometimes like the wrong metric of like, oh, you want to see like the number of interactions just constantly going up or this. It's like, I mean, to an extent, but like likely they're going to go start a like WhatsApp or group chat or whatever else, or like make their own spaces to keep interacting and doing those study groups or whatever else. So it's like, if nothing else, we're hopefully introducing people and creating those opportunities for connection, and then they'll, carry that on elsewhere. But so I think to kind of put a cherry on top of all this, Nightingale's approach and your sort of, the way that you're, engaging your students there and creating kind of the whole learner experience, what advice or things that you've learned from all this, like what advice would you give to other higher ed leaders that you feel like they should know as we're kind of just going through this whole kind of digital transformation journey?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just being really open-minded to what's out there as far as opportunities for changing the face of education. I think that we get really hung up on, this is how nursing education is supposed to be. And these are the standards that we want. And this is what you have to get in. And a lot of institutions are creating these policies that are really just hurting the nursing field almost more than it's helping. They're looking at, okay, well, how can we get the highest quality entrance into the program? And then let's make these really restrictive course failure policies so that the only people graduating are going to pass their NCLEX the first time. And I could talk for hours about how first-time pass rates are not a great measure of a nursing program. But I think looking at what is a measure of a good nursing program, how do you know that someone's a safe, competent nurse? It's not just because they passed their NCLEX. And having that passion and true care for people sometimes can get you so much farther. And so I think being open-minded to what that looks like, how we can get more people in the field by not reducing our standards, because they're still completing the courses, they're still graduating, but sometimes it takes a little bit more. We have learners that come in and we have a program called Foundational Learning, where if you don't if you fall within a certain band on the AccuPlacer, then you move into foundational education. And before you become an official entrant to the college, you're taking a couple courses that help support your math and writing skills so that you're up to the level that will help you be academically prepared for college. We are providing those at a super low cost to the learners, so they're not making the whole investment in their education. They're not signing up for a full nursing program yet. They're starting with what are those foundational things that they need to be successful. And then once they pass that, they become a nursing student. And so, just really looking outside the box. And by doing that, we're seeing they are gaining the academic skills that they need to be successful. They're retaining at a higher rate than before we had the foundational program. And I know a lot of people would probably want to know how they're doing on NCLEX. They're just starting to graduate, so I don't know quite yet, but we will know soon. But we are seeing such great persistence with those learners. And I think a lot of it is that support that we provided early on before they started in the nursing program. So they had those foundational skills. And that's something, a lot of nursing programs want you to do your gen eds first and then apply if you've been successful or had a certain GPA or taken a certain combination of classes. But that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at, do you have a desire? Can you meet the admissions requirements? Then we want to make you a nurse. We want to do everything that we can to support you. And so we have a really large group of support staff that are working together to really make that full experience for the learner. We call our employees collaborators, and it's really intentional because we're constantly working together we have learner success strategists that are assigned to every learner. They work with faculty to help the learner be successful. How can we help you inside and outside the classroom? How can we connect you to resources in your own community that can help you? And we've got a writing center and a math lab and a tech center to help learners with all those extra skills that they might need. And it's not just in your English courses, but you do a lot of writing and nursing and might need additional support there. So everybody's working together to see them be successful in a way that I don't typically see at institutions. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to refer you to this area. If you go there, great. Instead, we're like, hey, let's call your faculty member together and let's make a plan for you to catch up on this course so that you can be successful and graduate. So it's just a different outside of the box way of thinking, but we can have such a big impact on not just nursing, but any field that we're looking at with these kind of standards. We're able to open our minds to, how can we bring more access to people that might not have fit in that cookie cutter mold?
Yeah, the metaphor I was thinking of in my mind is like the idea that I would think certainly in nursing, but certainly in also many other fields, that there's this viewpoint of like, there's only one way to hike up the mountain to like get to that summit. You're, credentialed, certified, whatever it might be, but that like acknowledging that there can be a lot of like zigging and zagging of pathways, and that like, for that metaphor, it's like, well, you can only hike up the mountain if you've got all the gear. It's like, well, what if we like provided the gear to people? What if we provided like, hiking 101 training to like the idea of like sort of, the sort of a conditional admittance of like, okay, well, if you can complete these things, like you're going to be where we would need you to be a nursing student, versus being like, well, you don't have those. So like maybe go find them somewhere else and come back, or not. I don't care, whatever. So I think those are things like the idea of part of the zigging and zagging, getting up to the mountain could be like, well, we could deliver this, fully online, still doing the sort of clinical things, but people can do them in their local area as long as that's sort of coordinated and approved and tracked and all those sort of things. Like, that is a big kind of divergence of like kind of tried and true path that people have taken for a very long time. And I think the idea of the core thing that I'm hearing that you kind of framed very well is that like we can increase access, get more people into this profession, and not sacrifice on quality, the education and people being safe and kind of reliable practitioners in this field. So that's just really kind of reassuring to hear, I guess, that commitment from you and kind of your institution to kind of strive towards that goal. So as we wrap up, given your unique perspective, at a young, fully online institution, I'm just curious if there are like particular trend lines that you feel like are maybe unique that you're following, or just sort of the broader higher ed. I feel like we're going through a lot of existential crises right now. So I'm not sure if there's any trends that you're following right now, or any kind of unique things that you're kind of seeing from your vantage point there at Nightingale.
Well, I think Being in this digital environment, of course, I'm super focused on AI right now and how that's going to impact everything in higher education. I'm really looking from the standpoint of how can we teach learners how to use it appropriately? How do we use it to make our jobs easier, more efficient, not replace people, but how can we do a better job than sometimes humans can do? Some of the things, that AI can do for us. Also, the augmented reality and virtual reality in this space, how can we continue to use it and expand it to increase skill sets even more? We really look from a standpoint of how can we make you practice ready by the time you graduate? Not just ready to pass the NCLEX and gain licensure, but how can you walk right into your first job and feel confident in the skills that you learned to be able to perform as a nurse? And I think that virtual reality is a big answer to that. And how can we create better simulations, more realistic simulations that will allow you to feel like you have that experience right when you graduate, you can walk in ready to work. And I think that can be used in so many fields, not just nursing. I mean, I don't think there's a field out there that you can't use some kind of simulation for to really get some of that real life work experience feel before you graduate from college.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me that I imagine like AI literally for people doing the work of nursing is like, I would imagine, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong as sort of a brief follow-up, that idea that like if you could have a kind of contoured, really powerful and responsive like AI companion to like kind of check like, okay, I'm getting this sort of data, as I'm taking the vitals of my patient or this, that, the other thing, like, that idea that like, even as a medical professional, it's like you would still want to kind of like check reference material and do whatever else. So that idea that like AI could be that where it's like, they're certainly not there yet, but I've seen like the like little pins that people can wear and then you just sort of like talk to it and gives you a response. Like that's what I'm imagining is like a doctor could have like a little pin where they're kind of just like, hey, like, so I'm seeing this with the patient or whatever else. Like, could you remind me like what the symptoms of this and that? Like just that idea of like, cause it's so much that I would imagine like any medical professional would have to remember all the time. And if it's just sort of like, can you like double check my thinking here? I'm assuming this or whatever. And like the idea of like conversational AI that is empowered with like, all this sort of understanding of, symptoms and, ailments that people might have. Like, is that sort of like part of the thinking of like AI and literally the way that people practice medicine?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's so many applications for it. I almost think of like a start here, click here, click there, click there. Okay, did you do all of these things? And it would let you know if you forgot something. Maybe even when you're charting, if, here's what I saw, then it would, write that out for you in a way that makes sense in the chart, but then also perhaps make recommendations based on, common practice of what maybe the next steps should be. So I think, so much of what we're learning now is not as much the rote knowledge, but how to find the answers. And that's where I think AI can really help so much. It's a great starting point for a lot of things. And as it learns and gains a bigger knowledge base, it'll become more and more reliable. I mean, I remember back in the days of like Wikipedia, you could never trust anything that you saw. But then as more and more people contributed to it, those things became more and more reliable with backup sources and other places you could find the information. So it became a really good starting point. Let's see what's here. And then that gives you inspiration to look for all the other things. And I think AI can serve in that same capacity of, all right, here's what's going on. What do I need to do next? Because a lot of nursing is then what? Okay, this is what I know. Now, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to help the patient? How are they going to, what information do I need to give to the doctor? What information do I need to chart? Who do I need to involve in this situation? And I think there's a lot of those answers that over time AI will be able to begin providing.
Yeah, like the idea that there's still going to be such a huge place for sort of like your critical thinking, as a medical professional and sort of their bedside manner and all these sort of like, those are like going to be just core components still. But yeah, that sort of companion and supplement and thing that could just make your work more efficient and things like that. So that's great to hear. And I think too, like this is probably the conversation, even after all this time, because I think like virtual reality had its sort of like very quick hype cycle before like AI kind of stole the spotlight, I guess. But like I think just knowing that, like, I can imagine, this point next year, like in all the episodes that we'll have between now and then, like just more really tangible, specific, and sort of measurable uses of VR, and seeing that it's probably been this sort of like quiet simmering in the background of like people are actually like deploying, this, and I would say most predominantly in like learning experiences versus like I remember a lot of people being like, oh, we're going to have like a virtual campus. Like it's as if you're, walking around and it's whatever. And it's like, sure, I get like that's kind of like a novelty sort of thing, but like that obviously again has a lot of room to grow, I think too. But so yeah, I think just really cool to see like those really big waves of kind of digital transformation that are happening, like VR, AR, and AI, like all kind of interweaving into what you're doing there. So I think I'm sure more to come from you and many other institutions as they're sort of going on their respective journeys. But as we wrap up, we'll kind of do our kind of wrap up question here, as we always do. Just give you the floor, give you the opportunity, final thought, call to action, any particular resource or anything that you might want to share just to kind of tie everything together and kind of send folks on their way.
I think one of the biggest things that I have learned with my experience at Nightingale is that we are able to impact fields just starting with one person. And that's why I love this idea of increasing access to education and bringing it to the people versus bringing the people to the institution. If you think about rural communities and healthcare, adding one more nurse to a rural community might double the nurses in that township or a city. And that's just one person who is now providing so much more healthcare access to an entire community, and through their education are creating generational wealth and changing the whole experience for their whole family. And so each of us has the opportunity to impact so many people. And it really just starts with one person. Nightingale College started with a vision of one person who was so passionate about changing the world through healthcare. And there's so much impact, not just in creating these careers for the learners who graduate and become nurses, but then the impact on those communities throughout our country and then eventually the world. There's so many, just when we're able to think outside the box and think about, what can I do to change things? It's just incredible. So I just encourage everyone to think about, well, what if I just shook it all up and changed my thinking about how this field works? What could we do differently? Why does it have to be in this box? And I think we could provide access in so many other areas, in so many different fields, in a way that doesn't exist now, but will be the way of the future.
Yeah, inspiring words. I think a great call to action of like, thinking about that, impact of education. One, just like you're talking about, like for people's income and their, being gainfully employed, but certainly in this kind of sphere that we're talking about, just like really some powerful outcomes for access to quality healthcare and everything, which that could be in like the whole conversation here is talking about like, what does that mean? Like, why is that important? Yeah. Like, it's like, because like so many people have insurance, Medicare or Medicaid. There's like our tax expenditures, like the government having to do spending would be less if people are healthy. And then like more just healthy citizens is just like a better society, and, insurance costs. And like, there's like a lot of like just quantitative things, I guess, is where my mind went clearly, firstly. But like, I think that it is the idea of people able to live, longer, more fulfilling lives, and things like that. So a lot of great stuff, and I think, a great way to put it, I think, of just why that sort of like disruptive thinking and thinking in a new way of how we're delivering, some tried and true, professional education programs, whether it's nursing or teaching or any number of other things, why that's important and what sort of impact it can have for students and for our communities at large. So thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all that you did. We'll have ways to connect with you and Nightingale in the description for the episode as usual, but so glad that we were able to bump into each other and meet and make this connection and now do this episode. So just really appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Day Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.